Snow leapt from the ground in white fountains, torn up by invisible hands. Tracer lines stitched the dusk, red and green threads whipping over the shallow depression where the platoon had gone to earth. Every burst chewed the slope a little lower, a little closer. "Get your heads down," Master Chief Ryan Cole bellowed, voice raw against the continuous roar of machine gun fire. Snow and pulverized ice rained down on his helmet. Rounds hissed overhead close enough to feel on his cheeks. They were pinned, and he knew it. The valley that had looked so clean and harmless from the drone imagery now felt like the inside of a white bowl, its jagged sides lit by muzzle flashes. The ruined treeline they'd used as approach cover was shattered, trunks splintered and stripped, branches snapping off with every impact. Above, jagged ridges cut the sky into teeth. Cole pressed his chest into the snow, the cold seeping through the plates and gear to his bones, and keyed his radio again. "Valkyrie Actual, this is Hammer 1, he shouted. "We are in the valley, and we are getting cut to pieces. Say position. Say status." Static hissed back at him. He twisted the dial, toggled frequencies, tried the alternate net. "Valkyrie Actual, respond." "Mara, come on." Nothing. Just one long, unbroken wash of white noise. The satellite link had gone dead the moment they'd stepped into the valley proper. They'd assumed weather, terrain, the usual glitches. Now, with rounds walking toward them and explosions bracketing their shallow cover, Cole understood. This wasn't a glitch. They were jammed, deliberately. A mortar round whistled in and landed close enough to slap him sideways with a pressure wave. The blast flung a wall of snow into the air, a white curtain cutting him off from his guys for a heartbeat. He spat ice crystals, ears ringing, and forced himself upright. "Status," he yelled over the ringing, over the stuttering machine, guns chewing the upper slopes. "Somebody talk to me." "I'm good," someone to his left yelled back. "Bravo 2 up. Reyes is hit," another voice called, high with strain. "Legs bad, real bad." Cole low-crawled toward the sound, boots pushing through churned snow. Another mortar fell short, showering them with icy shrapnel. He tasted copper and realized he'd bitten his tongue. Reyes lay on his back behind a low berm of snow, one leg a mess of torn fabric and blood that looked black in the dimming light. The corpseman, Hunt, was already over him, bare hands slick and red as he packed gauze and tried to cinch a tourniquet with fingers that had long since gone numb. "Talk to me, Doc," Cole said, dropping to a knee. "Femorals nicked at least," Hunt panted. "Maybe worse. He moves, he bleeds out faster. I can slow it, but we gotta get him out of this bowl." Reyes tried to grin and failed. "Chief, I'm good. Just forgot how to use my leg is all." "Shut up and squeeze something," Hunt said, jamming a wad of cravat fabric into Reyes's hands. "Not me. The bandage." Cole looked up the slope. Muzzle flashes winked along the ridge like a line of cigarettes. Every time one flared, snow kicked up around them a heartbeat later. The enemy wasn't spraying blindly. They were walking rounds and methodically, adjusting fire like they'd rehearsed this 100 times. Because they had. His gut twisted. The drone crash site had been bait. The valley, a perfect kill box. Overlapping fields of fire, high ground on both sides, pre-sighted mortar targets. Their route in, their likely cover points, all predicted and plotted. He forced the thought back and slapped his hand on Hunt's shoulder. "Tourniquets. How many you got left?" "3 after this," Hunt said, his voice tight. "Morphine's low too." "We'll make it work," Cole lied, because anything else would kill them faster. "Ammo count." Voices called out across the depression, ragged roll call in the chaos. "2 mags. 3.5. Feeder's got 1 belt left for the saw." "Smoke. 2 white, 1 green," someone yelled. "That's it." He ran the math instinctively. Too few bullets. Not enough grenades. No way to sustain a push-up 200 meters of open snow against dug-in guns. Smoke for 1, maybe 2 last-ditch maneuvers if the wind cooperated. Another mortar landed close, sending up a fountain that collapsed over them like surf, heavy and suffocating. Cole shook it off and peered over the lip of the berm. High above, a small shape buzzed in and out of the low ceiling of clouds, catching slivers of the last light. A quadcopter drone, its tiny rotors barely audible over the gunfire and explosions. It drifted, paused, then moved, and a second later fresh rounds slammed into wherever it had hovered. "Of course," he muttered. "They've got eyes in the sky, too." The drone pivoted, nosing down toward their depression as if it could smell fear. Cole watched its shifting position and the way the mortar fire followed, understanding how thoroughly they were being read. Every movement they made, no matter how small, turned into new coordinates, new bursts of steel. He thought about calling for a push anyway, a desperate charge up the left slope to try punch through. Better to die moving than to be buried alive here. He could already feel that decision taking shape, a hard, cold thing settling into his chest. Another machine gun on the right ridge opened up, its rhythm slightly offset from the others, and the shallow depression they'd carved for cover began to dissolve in little puffs of exploding snow. He raised his radio again, though he already knew. "Valkyrie Actual, this is Hammer 1. Be advised, we are combat ineffective in 5 minutes. If you're out there, say something. Anything." Static. A distant, ugly hiss. No voice. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He could still see her in his mind's eye, at the map table, quiet, more interested in the terrain than the politics. Captain Marlock. Sniper first, officer second. The one who'd wanted to take the high route. The one he'd tried to reassure with a pat on the shoulder and a joke about her worrying too much. Hours later, she was a dead channel. A broken signal. Cole exhaled hard, swallowed whatever word he'd been about to say, and looked up at the ridgeline again. This time, he wasn't thinking of options. He was thinking of last orders. "All call signs," he shouted, voice cracking. "On my command, we're making for that grove at our 11. We do it in bounds, 2 at a time. If you're on your feet, you carry someone who isn't. A single, sharp crack cut through the bedlam. It wasn't their rifles. It wasn't the chattering machine guns. It was a lone, clean shot, distinct like a hammer hitting glass. High on the left ridge, one of the enemy machine guns stuttered mid-burst and went silent. The gunner's silhouette toppled backward, arms flung wide against the dusk. Cole blinked. For a second, the rest of the valley didn't notice. The other guns kept raking the slope, mortars kept walking in. Then another crack snapped across the cold air. Farther back, on a small outcropping where the quadcopter operator knelt beside his control tablet, a figure jerked and collapsed. The drone above them wobbled, its path suddenly aimless. It spun in a lazy, sick corkscrew, one rotor shaved off by the shot. It clipped the ridge face and tumbled down into the valley, vanishing into the blown snow. The mortar fire stuttered. Rounds fell long, then short, losing their razor-line precision. Whoever had been calling corrections from that drone's feed was now lying in the snow. Cole's brain struggled to catch up. Those shots hadn't come from his guys. They'd come from behind the enemy line. The angle was all wrong for friendly forces. Higher. Further back. He risked a quick sweep with his binoculars, wiping frost from the lenses with the edge of his glove. On the right ridge, 2 enemy fighters were standing, pointing upward, shouting in a language he didn't understand but fully grasped the tone of surprise, anger. Another man began scrambling toward a dark gash in the rock just below the crest, an oblong shadow where the first shot must have originated. Cole tracked his gaze there. Something moved in that shadow. For a moment, he thought it was just the wind carving an illusion in the ice, some trick of the failing light. Then a figure stepped forward, emerging from the darkness at the mouth of an ice cave. The world seemed to narrow to that single point. The figure was slender under layered cold-weather gear, rifle held low and relaxed. She stood outlined against the snow glow, a darker cutout against blue-white. The helmet, the stance, the slight tilt of the head as she looked down into the valley. He knew them without needing to see her face. "Holy," one of the younger operators whispered. "Chief, is that?" Cole stared up, throat suddenly dry. Mara. He had seen her disappear in a spray of snow and rock over 6 hours ago. He had seen the avalanche spill down over the ledge she'd been traversing. He'd heard the half-transmitted mayday. He'd watched the slope from below and told himself there was no way anyone had lived through that. Yet there she was, dark against the cave mouth, high above both his men and the enemy that was killing them. As if feeling his eyes on her, she lifted her rifle slightly and made a single, decisive hand signal. Even from that distance, even through snow haze and adrenaline, the meaning was clear. Stay put. Trust me. Before anyone below could process it, she stepped backward and vanished into the cave again, swallowed by darkness. On the ridge, the enemy squad that had spotted her began to climb faster, scattering around the rocks, shouting up the slope. The remaining machine guns tried to tilt, searching for whatever phantom had just started cutting their supports. Down in the depression, the fire lifted just a little. Not gone, not by a long shot, but thinner, sloppier, suddenly off kilter. Smoke, Cole barked, feeling the shift like air rushing into a room. Throw smoke and shift 5 meters north. Crawl, don't stand. Move now. White cylinders arced out, hissing into plumes that grew and drifted, a frail curtain between them and the ridges. Men crawled, dragged their wounded, slid into slightly deeper dips in the snow. It wasn't much, but it was different, and different was life. Shots continued to crack from high above, spaced and deliberate. Each one changed the sound of the battle, carving out little holes in the enemy's rhythm. Cole's heart hammered against his ribs as he flattened out behind a fresh berm, snow packing into every gap in his kit. He looked up again, toward that dark hole in the rock where she had stood. How the hell? He whispered, half to himself, half to the frozen air. No answer came, just the distant echo of another perfectly placed shot and a question swelling in the silence between blasts. How had she survived? How had she reached that impossible angle, behind a line that was supposed to be unassailable? And what had she seen or understood that let her dismantle a kill box built to swallow them whole? Hours before the valley became a bowl of fire, the mountains had been quiet. The forward operating base huddled in a hollow of wind-packed snow, low, dark shapes half-buried, antenna masts rimed with ice. The blades of the inbound helicopter slowed from a hard roar to a lazy thump, flinging up last curls of powder before settling to stillness. The aircraft sat steaming faintly in the cold, metal ticking as it cooled. Inside the briefing tent, canvas walls bulged with every gust of wind. A propane heater hummed in the corner, its glow painting the faces gathered around the folding table in uneven orange. Maps covered the table's surface, satellite imagery, contour lines, grease pencil overlays. Someone had drawn a thick route line up a narrow valley, with arrows pointing toward a marked crash site. Captain Mara Locke stood with her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, eyes tracking the curvature of the terrain more than the ink. A lock of dark hair escaped from under her fleece cap, stuck to her forehead with melted snow. The drone went down here, the intelligence officer was saying, tapping the red X, high-altitude bird, modified sensor suite. We lost it to weather, best guess. The airframe's not the concern. The sensor pod is. Encrypted storage, pattern mapping, a few toys that aren't cleared for show and tell. He looked up at the assembled operators, 30-odd men in various stages of cold weather gear, steaming coffee cups in hand, faces lean with sleeplessness. Our friends across the border want that storage as much as we want it back, the intel man continued. They get it. They see 6 months of your patrol patterns. They get to read our habits, plan around them. They also get a front row seat to some tech we'd prefer not to see plastered across their propaganda channels. So we get there first. Cole said from Mara's right, arms crossed, jaw working a piece of gum. We scoop it, we blow what we can't carry, we come home. Simple. Mara's gaze stayed on the map. Nothing's simple in those valleys, she said quietly. The intel officer cleared his throat. We believe the airframe came down hard. Thermal imaging suggests the crash site is here, in the stream bed. The valley narrows around it. Good news for you because they can't bring vehicles in. Bad news if they're waiting. You'll be approaching from this side. He traced the route line the planners had drawn, into the valley's mouth, along the frozen stream, up to the choke point where it tightened into a bottleneck, and then on to the crash mark. Mara's eyes narrowed at the choke point. On the imagery, the snow there looked pristine. Too pristine. No dark smudges of rock showing, no scrapes, no avalanche debris where there should have been some. How old is this imagery? She asked. 48 hours, the intel man said. Weather's been stable. No major falls since then. You sure? She murmured. He opened his hands. As sure as we ever are here, Captain. The younger team leader, Lieutenant Harris, leaned in between them, gloved finger tracing the same valley route. Ma'am, if we push straight up the bowl, we're there and back before the weather closes again. Long route along the ridgeline adds 3 hours minimum. Exfil windows skinny already. Mara tapped the choke point with her fingertip, her nail clicking softly on the laminated surface. This stretch bothers me, she said. Too clean. No evidence of small slides. No exposed rock. No old tracks, no nothing. It's like someone ironed it. Cole smirked faintly. Maybe the mountains just being polite for once. Mountains don't do polite, Mara said, almost absently. Her gaze was far away for a moment, back in some other range, some other valley. She saw flashes of memory, figures running through powder, the slow roll of snow turning into a roar, a radio screaming and then not. Look, Harris said, if they're out there, they're more likely to be near the crash site than the choke. We move fast and tight. We're hard catch with pants down. We drag in high ground teams. We're slowed, spread out, and we risk losing the window. Cole nodded. We've done worse with less. We go up the valley. We keep our spacing. We watch the ridges. We've got thermals. We got suppressors. We've got enough toys to ruin anybody's day if they stick their heads out. Mara didn't argue. Not exactly. She scanned a second, older map she'd insisted they dig out, paper yellowed and folded, lines hand-drawn. It showed thin, faded curves that the digital overlays ignored. Goat paths, avalanche chutes, forgotten shepherd trails. There, she thought, along the right wall, a narrow bypass, barely more than a ledge, shadowed most of the day. High slow, exposed to wind, but it threaded above the choke point, connecting broken ridges and small shelves. From there, you could see the valley floor and the slopes opposite. From there, you could watch both. She traced that route with her eyes, then flipped the map closed and slipped it into her chest rig. Main body can take the valley, she said. I'll take a small overwatch element up this route. We'll be your insurance policy if someone decides to turn that bowl into a shooting gallery. Harris opened his mouth to protest and thought better of it. Cole gave her a sideways look. Captain, that high route is nasty. You fall up there, we're not walking you out. If someone has to be up there, Mara replied, it should be me. The intel officer watched the exchange, fingers drumming on the table. You're comfortable splitting your force, Captain? Comfortable, Mara echoed. No, I just prefer being cold and miserable up top to blind down below. Cole snorted softly. She hates valleys, he said to no one in particular. Mountain tried to eat her once. She holds a grudge. There were a few chuckles. The story had circulated in fragments. A previous deployment, a different range, a white wall of snow that had come down faster than they could outrun it. Casualties. A rope snapping. A mayday call lost in static. Mara had walked out of that one with cracked ribs and a scar near her temple, but she'd left part of herself buried under the drifts. She felt all their eyes for a moment, respect, skepticism, that edge of doubt that always crept in when someone refused to shrug off a threat that no one else could see. She let it roll off her and returned to the map. Overwatch team of 4, she said. We'll move out first, set up along this upper shelf by the time the main element hits the choke. If it's clean, great. If it's not, you'll want someone behind them, not in front. Cole shifted his jaw. You're the boss, he said. We'll run it your way. Not my way, she said. The terrains. Gear Up was a small ritual war against the cold. Men pulled on insulated overwhites, cinched straps, checked buckles. Weapons wore white wraps that broke up their outlines. Thermals were powered on, sight pictures checked. Extra batteries went into inner pockets where body heat might keep them alive another hour. Mara went through her kit with the quiet, obsessive care of someone checking more than equipment. Rifle, checked and cleared. Backup sidearm. A small demo pouch. One compact, monocular clipped where she could reach it. The old, folded map tucked behind her plate. Radios, both primary and backup, each tested on multiple freks. She added one small item that no one noticed, an emergency beacon, stripped down and repurposed over several nights. Its housing was scratched, its tiny battery pack wrapped in tape. It wasn't standard issue, not in this configuration. She slipped it into a pouch where she could feel its weight against her ribs. Outside the tent, the wind knifed across the packed snow of the FOB. As the patrol filed toward the gate, a faint buzzing drifted down from somewhere overhead. It was soft, almost like a fly in a bottle, quickly buried under the crunch of boots and the rattle of gear. Most of the men ignored it, whined through the antenna masts, maybe a generator misbehaving, another mundane bass noise. Mara's head tilted slightly. She looked up, eyes narrowing at the low clouds. For a moment, she thought she saw something small moving along the gray underside, a tiny, unnatural silhouette against the gloom. Then it was gone. "Problem, Cap?" Cole asked, adjusting the strap on his pack. "Probably nothing," she said, though the line between her brows deepened. "Let's get moving. Weather's not going to wait." The patrol snaked out of the wire and into the world beyond. The base shrank behind them, swallowed by folds of terrain. Ahead, the mountains loomed, white, solid, ancient. The air had a dry, metallic edge that caught in the throat. As they moved into the foothills, conversation fell into the familiar pattern of small jokes and breath counting. Snow squeaked under boots, then shifted to a soft crunch as they climbed. Breath steamed, eyelashes crusted with frost. They kept an eye on the sky, on the ridgelines, on the patterns of wind across the slopes. Mara kept watching more subtle signs. How the snow clung to rock here, but not there, where the wind had scoured and where it had deposited. Where the valley narrowed, where sound echoed differently. She broke off with her chosen overwatch element at a prearranged fork. The main body continued up the valley floor, their silhouettes slowly shrinking as they wove between stunted trees and boulders. Cole gave her a two-fingered salute from below. "We'll keep the bowl warm for you, Cap. Try not to decorate it with shrapnel," she called back. Harris gave her a look that was half challenge, half reluctant respect. "We'll see you on the other side, ma'am." She nodded, then turned uphill, leading her small team toward the thin line of ledges and chutes she'd traced on the old map. Every step taking her farther from the relative safety of numbers and closer to the heights where a single misstep could send her tumbling into oblivion. From high on the mountain, the valley looked peaceful. Midday sun filtered through a thin veil of cloud, turning the snow's surface into a soft, diffuse glow. The stream bed was a frozen ribbon weaving through the bowl, flanked by low banks and clusters of wind-twisted trees. It might have been a postcard, untouched, serene, the world muffled by winter. The main platoon moved in a staggered file along the frozen stream, a line of muted shapes blending into the white. Their overwhites broke up their outlines, but every movement still seemed loud to Mara's eye. She watched them through her monocular from a rocky outcrop near the tree line, wind carrying their faint radio chatter up to her before the jammer killed it. "Point man sees something," one of her overwatch operators, Vance, murmured. Down below, the point man had stopped, one hand up, rifle angled toward a dark mass half buried in the snow. The drone. Even from here, it looked wrong to Mara. Too intact. The fuselage lay in a shallow trench, dusted with fresh snow, but the impact pattern around it suggested it hadn't cartwheeled the way physics said it should. There was no scattering of debris downrange. No scorched snow. Just placement. "Look staged," she said. "Maybe it skidded," Vance offered, not sounding convinced. She watched as the point man advanced, another operator peeling off to cover his flank. The rest of the platoon fanned out, taking up positions on either side of the stream, rifles oriented toward the ridges. Cole moved behind them, a dark shape among lighter ones, posture relaxed but ready. "Come on," Mara whispered to herself. "Come on, see it." The point man nudged the wreckage with his boot, then leaned in to peer at where the sensor pod should have been bolted under the fuselage. "It's gone," Vance said, seeing it the same moment she did. "Pod's gone." Tracks led away from the site, faint indentations in the snow, already softening under the cold sun. They climbed toward the valley walls, disappearing into shadowed gullies and rocky folds. "They beat us to it," Vance muttered. "We're late to our own crash." "Not just late," Mara said. Her fingers tightened on the monocular. "We're expected." On the valley wall opposite her, a shard of light flickered once and vanished. It was small enough that anyone else might have missed it. She did not. "Sniper glass," she said. "There." She shifted, trying to get a better angle, but the glass stayed hidden. The valley seemed to hold its breath. "Valkyrie Actual to Hammer 1, she said into her radio. "You have enemy presence." "Repeat, you have." The first shot cracked across the valley. The point man jerked, a puff of red mist against white. He folded without a sound, rifle sliding from his hands. For half a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the valley erupted. Machine guns on both ridges opened up at once, their overlapping fields of fire turning the bowl into a mesh of tracers. Snow leapt where rounds struck, branches shattered, chunks of ice whined through the air like thrown knives. The platoon broke for cover, instincts kicking in before thought. "Contact left and right," someone yelled over the net. Multiple heavy positions. Mara's overwatch element hit the deck as mortars began to fall, the first rounds landing short, then adjusting. Each explosion threw a column of snow up, the blasts echoing between the ridges. Her radio shrieked, then flattened into a long, rising hiss. Even her backup net filled with noise. "Jammer just lit up," she snapped. "They've got wideband in play. Vance, get eyes on." The rest of her sentence dissolved in a roar. A mortar landed close to their ledge, the shockwave blasting her off her feet. Snow and ice gave way under her boots, the narrow shelf shuddering as cracks raced along it. For a moment, she was weightless, flailing, grabbing for rock that wasn't there. Vance's hand flashed past her field of view, fingers outstretched and missing by inches. His shout cut off as the ledge disintegrated beneath them in a slow-motion wave. The world inverted, sky where ground should be, snow filling her vision. She folded around herself, trying to protect her head and radio as she tumbled. The sensation was of falling forever through white noise. Then the mountain reached up and hit her. From the valley floor, all they saw was a sudden cascade pouring off the high route. A thin banner of snow peeled away, then thickened, roaring down the cliff face in a sheet. The narrow ledge where Mara's team had been a moment before vanished under the slide. Cole heard her voice in his headset, a clipped, urgent warning cut off midward. Then nothing. The jamming rolled over their frequencies, turning them into blank, screaming channels. He stared up at the falling snow, stomach going cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air temperature. "Valkyrie Actual, say again," he shouted. "Overwatch team, respond." No one did. The slope where they'd been was a smooth white smear, featureless. Mortars walked closer, each one hugging the last in a tight pattern. Rounds chewed up the positions where his squads had tried to settle, forcing them to keep moving or be buried. Heavy machine guns roared from above, sending them scrabbling into whatever hollows they could carve with helmets and bare hands. "Stay in the low spots," Cole bellowed, dragging one man down as a burst stitched overhead. "Keep your spacing, don't bunch." Another operator screamed as shrapnel bit into his side. The medic, Hunt, broke cover and crawled, body low, dragging a med bag behind him. He reached the wounded man and immediately had to make ugly decisions. Tourniquet here, pressure there, which one of his dwindling supplies to spend on injuries that might still walk if they got out. They weren't getting out. Smoke grenades detonated, leaking thin, ghostly clouds that the wind tore apart almost as soon as they formed. The idea had been to mask movement, but the gusts chopped the cover into useless wisps. Visibility collapsed in bursts as impacts kicked up powder, the air turning into a white fog that hid bullets and shockwaves alike. "Chief," Harris crawled up beside him, eyes too wide in a face gone pale with cold and adrenaline. "We can't stay. They're bracketing us. Next volley's gonna land right on top of." "You think I don't see that?" Cole snapped, then forced himself to lower his voice. It wasn't Harris's fault. Fear made people louder. Options. Harris swallowed hard. We go uphill. Pick a side, pick a seam, and sprint. They can't cover everywhere. We leave the worst wounded and hope we can send someone back. Cole hated that suggestion almost as much as he hated the reality. Uphill meant open snow. No cover, no concealment, just a 200-meter dead run under converging fire. Leaving wounded went against every bone in his body. They were running out of time. Their extraction bird would be angling into the airspace soon, looking for a signal that wasn't there. Airspace corridors were tight here, politics tighter. If they missed their window, there wouldn't be a second. And the enemy forces that had already taken the sensor pod, they weren't just going to sit on their ridges and shoot until they got bored. They'd close the ring, finish the job. Cole pressed his forehead into the snow for a second, letting the cold bite into his skin. Think, if they stayed, the mortars would complete the box. If they ran, the guns would chew them up. Without overwatch, without comms, without their commander, there was no one to unmake the geometry that had been built to kill them. He lifted his head, decision hardening. "I'll call signs," he shouted. "We're executing a fighting withdrawal to that grove at our 11. Shift fire, pop what smoke you got left, and move in teams of 2. We carry who we can, and we don't stop until we hit those trees." He could feel the weight of it settle over the men, the grim acceptance of bad choices made under worse conditions. They'd trained for this. They'd rehearsed bounding drills until their legs shook. They talked about casualty triage in sterile classrooms where nobody bled on the floor. Now, under the real sky, the concepts felt both too small and too big. The first team moved. Smoke popped, blooming briefly before the wind shredded it. 2 figures rose from the shallow depression, bent low, dragging a third between them. For a moment, they formed clear shapes against the snow. Machine guns immediately stitched at them, rounds snapping and kicking up geysers of powder. One of the moving figures stumbled, then lurched back up, refusing to fall. They reached a slightly deeper dip and threw themselves in, the casualty tumbling in beside them. Cole shouted for the next team to go, then the next. Each movement burned ammunition they didn't have, required covering fire they could barely sustain, and adjusted the enemy's aim. Mortars, sensing the shift, began to walk their pattern toward the grove. He watched the smoke, the staggered shapes, the constant dance of stand, move, drop, his heart counting down. His mind insisted on seeing patterns in the barrage, trying to predict the next fall. It was like staring at the ocean and guessing which wave would wash you away. He was hauling a wounded operator by the drag handle when he heard the whistle. It was subtle at first, lost in the echo of distant shots. Then it grew, a rising scream that pulled at some animal part of his brain. Cole looked up. The mortar rounds were converging, their trails faint streaks in the dull sky. They were coming in not randomly, not as a line walking forward, but in a tight cluster directly over the path he'd chosen for their withdrawal. They weren't just pre-sighted. They were adjusting to his choices, reading him. Someone, somewhere, was watching their movements and feeding corrections. The kill box wasn't just built. It was being actively operated. The crash site, the valley, the choke point, all of it had been bait for something bigger than a data grab. He had just enough time to curse himself for not convincing Mara harder, for not fighting the route more, for not noticing whatever she had seen in that too clean snow. The first round hit 20 meters short, blowing a crater into the slope and flattening a sapling. The next landed 10 meters beyond that. The third, the mountain shook. Far above the valley floor, buried in ice and darkness, Mara woke to pain and silence. Her ears rang with a high, piercing tone. For a moment, she could feel nothing but cold pressing in from all sides, like she'd been poured into snow and left to set. Then sensation trickled back in patches. A throb in her ribs, the sting of something wet on her forehead, the familiar weight of her gear trying to drag her deeper into the drift. She was wedged in a narrow space between walls of blue-white ice, half buried under powder that had poured down with her. It was dim, but not completely dark. A milky light filtered down from somewhere above, turning the fissure into an underwater corridor. She coughed, droplets of blood marking the snow in front of her lips. Her radio hissed faintly, but nothing intelligible came through. When she tried to push herself up, pain flared along her side, sharp enough to make her teeth grind. "Okay," she whispered. Her voice sounded small in the confined space. "Checklist." She wiggled her toes. They responded, though sluggishly. Fingers, too. No stabbing pain in her spine. No boneless flop to her limbs. Bruised, battered, but not broken. She clawed snow away from her chest and fumbled for her kit. Sidearm, still holstered. Rifle. She found it half a meter away, partially encased in ice. The charging handle was packed with frozen slush. Monocular, still clipped to its tether. Demo kit. Emergency beacon, digging into her ribs. Her primary radio's casing was cracked, its antenna bent at an ugly angle. She keyed it anyway. "Valkyrie Actual to all hammer elements," she rasped. "Say status." Anyone reading this, respond now. Only the jammer's static answered, a low roar that reminded her of the sound of the avalanche that had brought her here. It filled the tiny space, crowding out everything else. She shut her eyes and listened past the noise. Faint, distant booms rolled through the ice. The valley floor was taking a pounding. Between explosions, she could just make out the stuttering rhythm of machine guns. The pattern of the impacts told her as much as the sound. Tight grouping, then a slight shift, bracketing. Whoever was dropping those rounds knew exactly where her people were. She thought of the map, of the too clean snow, of the missing sensor pod, of the faint buzzing over the base that morning. "Killed box," she murmured. "You sons of—" She didn't finish the sentence. Talking wouldn't change the trajectory of mortars. Only action would. She twisted herself into a crouch, fighting the protesting muscles in her side. Boots found purchase on slick ice. The fissure she'd fallen into sloped gently downward at first, then flattened. It wasn't just a crack. It was part of a network. She could see branching corridors beyond, invisible from outside. She clicked on a small headlamp, its beam cutting a pale tunnel through the gloom. The walls glowed, veins of trapped air forming strange patterns in the ice. She moved. The crevasse widened in places and narrowed in others, forcing her to turn sideways and drag her pack through. In one tight spot, she had to exhale fully and shimmy like a snake to squeeze past a protruding block of ice. Every scrape of her gear sounded too loud. The cold was different down here. Not the biting, windy chill of the open slopes, but a deep, still frigidity that felt old. Her breath fogged and lingered, swirling slowly. She was maybe 50 meters in when she saw the first sign that she wasn't the only one who'd ever used this underworld. A boot print in a thin layer of frost, half softened but unmistakable. Not hers. Not one of her men's. The tread pattern was wrong. A few steps beyond, a foil ration wrapper lay half frozen into the ice, its writing in a foreign alphabet. Someone had eaten here, or at least paused long enough to drop their trash. So she thought. You like the hidden routes, too. She pressed on, following the path that logic and terrain suggested would parallel the valley wall. The fissure branched and rejoined, but always arced in the same general direction, following a weakness in the rock beneath the snow. At intervals, the ice thinned near the outer face, creating small windows warped and clouded. Through them she caught glimpses of the world above, the bright smear of the drone wreckage, the jagged black lines of tree trunks, bursts of snow thrown up by impacts. Muzzle flashes winked like fireflies in a blizzard. Her people were alive for now. A tight formation of figures scrambled for cover, smoke drifting around them in nervous strands. Each time she saw them, they were in slightly worse positions, slightly tighter spaces. She needed to understand the geometry that was killing them. She needed to see the whole thing, not just slices. She killed the headlamp and stood in darkness, allowing her eyes to adjust to the faint blue. The roar of the battle outside was muffled but present, like a heartbeat through a thick chest. The jammer's presence was more than radio noise now. As she moved, she noticed a particular vibration in the ice, a low, constant hum that grew stronger in certain directions. Electronic equipment had a way of making itself known if you listened with more than ears. She angled toward the hum. Eventually, the fissure rose sharply, forming a steep, narrow chimney. Above, a weak oval of gray light marked an opening. The walls here were sheer ice with occasional knobs of rock, climbable, but only if she trusted her tools and didn't think too hard about falling. She unspooled a rope, drove an improvised anchor into a seam in the rock, and started up. Each placement of her crampons and picks had to be exact. The ice occasionally creaked under her weight, a sound that made her teeth itch. Halfway up, a mortar round detonated somewhere above, the shock wave rattling the chimney. Snow sifted down in curtains. Her right boot slipped, sending a jolt through her body. Her ribs screamed protest as she swung and slammed into the wall, knocking the breath from her. For a moment, she dangled, vision spotted. Her optic, strapped across her chest, banged hard against the ice. When she regained her grip and twisted it up to check, she saw a crack spidering across the edge of the housing. Not enough to kill it. Enough to make the sight picture less than perfect. She could spend 5 precious minutes babying it back into alignment. Or she could accept that her shots might be a breath off and factor it into her corrections. She thought of the ticking extraction window, of the way the mortars were tightening their pattern, of the last time she'd hesitated in a mountain and men had died. She clipped the optic back down. "You'll do," she said. The last meters of the chimney were a blur of stress and muscle memory. When she finally hauled herself over the lip, she found herself on a narrow cornice, maybe a meter deep, clinging to the upper face of the valley wall. The ledge curved along the cliff, disappearing into rock on both sides. Above her, the ridge crest stood another 10 meters up. Below, the valley floor yawned. She lay flat, chest heaving, and dared to look. From here, she could see everything. The valley was no longer a pretty bowl. It was a diagram, a textbook example of how to kill a force in open terrain. Heavy machine guns spaced at intervals along both ridges, their arcs of fire overlapping neatly over the stream bed. Mortar impact zones clustered around the crash site and the grove where Cole had probably thought to retreat. A likely observation post tucked behind a rock with a clear line of sight to the key positions. And there, further back along the ridge she was now level with, a bulky shape half hidden under a camouflage net, cables running from its side to a field of small, stubby antennas. A jammer. The hum in the ice vibrated more strongly here. If she'd stayed with the valley element, she would have been down there with them, pinned in the bowl, blind. Up here, having nearly been swallowed by the mountain, she was behind the curtain. She slid her damaged optic off, wiped frost from its lens, and mounted it again. The cracks distorted the edges, but the center was usable enough. She chambered around carefully, feeling for any grind that might herald ice still trapped inside. The bolt closed. Time to talk to someone. Her primary radio was still worthless, but the emergency beacon pressed against her ribs was not designed to work like a normal comms unit. She popped its casing with a multi-tool, exposing a circuit board and wires. With quick motions, she cannibalized a couple of components from her broken radio and spliced them in, fingers careful despite their numbness. It wouldn't give her conversation. It might give her a blink, a short, high-energy burst on an obscure frequency. Enough for someone who'd listened to her habits to recognize. Before the mission, she'd quietly reprogrammed a few of the platoon's radios with that backdoor frequency, tucking it into their alternate channel list. Habit from another deployment, a way to get through when everything else failed. She hadn't insisted. She'd just done it, with a few quiet explanations. Now, she powered the improvised device, set the frequency, and pressed the transmit contact. A pulse of energy surged out, too quick for the jammer to react to specifically. Somewhere below, in the valley, a radio crackled. On his chest, under his plate, Cole felt the buzz before he registered the sound. His primary net was a screaming blank, but his hand moved automatically to the secondary handset. When he keyed it, he caught a fragment, a sharp tone, then a click, then silence. His spine prickled. "Valkyrie," he tried, barely daring to hope. "If that's you, key twice." On the ridge above, Mara thumbed the improvised transmitter twice in quick succession. 2 faint clicks answered him. He closed his eyes, a wild, incredulous laugh caught in his chest. "You gotta be kidding me," he whispered. "Mara," he said into the mic, keeping his voice low, as if sound alone could give her away. "If you can hear me, you're a ghost. We thought you were." She key-clicked once, a rough approximation of negative in their shorthand. "Yeah, okay," he said. "You're not dead. My bad. You planning on explaining how later?" 2 slow clicks. "Later." "All right," he said, grinning despite the mortar smoke stinging his eyes. "Let's talk now. We're pinned in the bowl. My best guess, we've got heavy guns at our 10 and 2 o'clock high. Mortars dialing in from somewhere behind. We're low on everything. Tell me you've got some kind of angle up there, Captain." Mara, prone on the cornice, studied her sight picture. Through the cracked optic, she could see the enemy sniper's nest, camouflaged but not invisible. That rifleman had fired the opening shot. He'd be confident, comfortable, sure of his dominance over the valley. She shifted to the next target, the small platform where the drone operator had been when she'd glimpsed the flicker of screen earlier. Even now, she could see a replacement crouched there, peering at a feed from a new quadcopter hovering above the fight. Further back, the jammer sat like a metal toad, its crew huddled against the cold, attention more on screens than surroundings. Behind them, under a rocky overhang, a cluster of men bent over maps and radios. Mortar fire direction, probably, and the ground commander. There was an order to their effectiveness. Kill the periphery, the ones with rifles, and the guns would just keep roaring, guided by eyes and ears. Kill the eyes and ears, and the guns would stumble. She pictured it like a ladder in her head, rungs labeled with functions instead of ranks. Sniper, drone, jammer, mortar cell, command. She keyed the improvised transmitter in a short burst, then waited. Cole heard the static pop and pieced together the meaning from context. "You're prioritizing targets?" he asked. "You see them. 1 click." "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "Okay, we're your distraction. We'll give you noise and movement when you need it. You call the beats, we dance." She smiled thinly, unseen. The last time she'd been in a mountain trap, she'd lacked this vantage. She'd had to guess where the avalanche had started, where the rounds were coming from. Men had died because her guesses had been half a second off. This time, she would not guess. She would make the calls. She waited for the pattern of mortar fire, listened to the cadence. Boom. Pause. Boom. Pause. On the third boom, she exhaled and brought her crosshairs over the sniper's position. The sniper was scanning the valley through his scope, searching for movement for targets. He would not be expecting a shot from behind and above. He wouldn't even know where to look. She squeezed the trigger during the next mortar blast. The crack of her rifle folded into the echo, masked by the larger sound. Through the optic, she saw the sniper's head jerk sideways. He slumped, rifle tumbling from his hands. Down below, Cole saw one of the muzzle flashes on the left ridge wink out. The buzz of rounds from that sector faded to nothing. The air on that side felt subtly different, less saturated with invisible death. He keyed his high net and shouted to the nearest squad. "Left side gun is down. Shift your movement that way. Stay low." Mara was already sliding a few meters along the cornice, spreading her shots so the enemy wouldn't peg her position too quickly. She brought the drone operator into view. The man was hunched over his monitor, fingers on controls, eyes reflecting ghostly light. She watched the quadcopter's path above the valley, the way it hovered, dipped, then darted. It was adjusting to the shift in the gun's coverage, seeking new angles. She angled her rifle slightly down, just enough to catch the edge of the operator's screen. Another mortar fall boomed. She fired. The bullet sliced through the tablet and into the man's chest. The screen shattered, throwing a spray of glass. The operator jerked backward, arms flailing. The quadcopter overhead suddenly spun, its controlled humming turning into a desperate whine as it lost guidance. It began to spiral, listing drunkenly. It clipped a rock outcropping, ricocheted, and plunged. Somewhere in the falling snow, its rotors shattered. Mortar rounds that had been marching neatly along the platoon's last known positions began to drift, their impacts no longer symmetrical. The pattern broke. Cole didn't need a sight picture to know what had just happened. He heard the mortars go wild and felt hope spike. Above, on the ridge, enemy fighters started shouting. Mara saw them clustering around the now-silent sniper nest and the fallen drone operator, arms gesturing wildly. A few pointed in her general direction, but their search was unfocused. Her shots had folded into the thunder of their own weapons. To them, the losses might have looked like bad luck at first. It wouldn't stay that way. She shifted and brought the jammer into view. Its primary antenna was a vertical mast with a cluster of elements at the top. Its crew wore headsets, oblivious to the fact that someone had begun to pick apart their shield. The crackle in her own improvised comm told her the unit was still saturating the spectrum, but its field wouldn't be perfect. Not if she cut into it. She let her crosshairs settle on a point where metal met support. Wind tugged at her, trying to push her off the cornice. Her ribs ached with each breath. She waited for a gust to pass, for the moment when her sight picture ran still. She squeezed. The antenna's top section shattered, pieces falling away. Sparks spit from the base as circuits overloaded. The hum in the ice under her boots dipped, then steadied at a lower intensity. Down in the valley, Cole's radio suddenly spat a burst of actual words, half blended with static but intelligible. Hammer 1. This is Talon. We copy partial. Say again last over. It was the overhead bird, skirting the edge of the agreed corridor, fighting the same weather and jamming that had choked them before. Now, with the jammer wounded, their signal could thread a narrow path. Cole keyed his mic. Talon, this is Hammer 1. We are in heavy contact inside pre-planned kill box. We have wounded and are combat ineffective. Valkyrie Actual is alive and conducting overwatch from enemy rear. We need you on station as soon as you can safely get here. Copy Valkyrie Actual alive. The pilot responded, disbelief coloring the words. We'll hold as close as we can. You mark an LZ. We'll come in low and fast when you call it. Weather clock is ticking, Hammer. You got maybe 30 minutes before this window slams shut. Understood. Cole looked around at the craters, the shredded trees, the men pressed into their shallow cover. 30 minutes to unmake an entire ambush and carve a path to somewhere a bird could land. 30 minutes with low ammo, wounded, and an enemy who'd already had the advantage. Above, Mara's gun spoke again and again, each shot buying them slivers of opportunity. The enemy adapted. They always did. The first sign was the sudden lull in machine gun fire from a particular sector, not because her bullets had silenced another nest, but because the guns there were being repositioned. Men moved, darker silhouettes against the snow, converging on a path that led up the cliffs near her. They had realized that their losses all traced back to somewhere in the upper face. Someone had finally chosen to stop assuming it was bad luck and start hunting the source. A small team of climbers broke from the main force, their harnesses and tools visible even through the snow haze. They moved with confidence, clearly no strangers to these slopes. Their path cut along a route that paralleled the fissure she'd used, a route she knew was navigable but difficult. At the same time, a new drone rose from behind a rock, a smaller, more compact model than the last, its rotors shrouded, its silhouette harder to catch against the sky. It rose carefully, hugging the cliff line, scanning the ridges in a patient, systematic grid. They were coming for her with eyes and hands both. She could break contact, slide back along the cornice, and retreat into the fissure, trading vantage for safety. She could try to relocate to another outcropping, play cat and mouse along the wall. Or she could stay and keep cutting threads until there were enough holes in the enemy's net for her people to slip through. She thought of the old avalanche, of the men whose name she still knew by heart, even years later, of promises made in quiet nights when sleep wouldn't come, about what she'd do if she ever got another chance to step into a mountain kill box with full knowledge of its geometry. Fear surged. It painted vivid pictures in her mind, falling again, this time from higher, hitting rocks instead of snow, being cornered by climbers on a ledge too narrow to fight on, being taken, alive, gear stripped, paraded on some grim video feed. Function followed, steadying her hands. She keyed the improvised transmitter in a short pattern. Cole, half-deaf from the last round of explosions, leaned in to listen, then shouted orders. On my mark, everyone pop smoke and faint left, he yelled. Make it look like we're pushing for that notch. We're not going to make it. We just need them to believe we're trying. What notch? Harris demanded, eyes wild. The one our ghost up there can see, Cole said. Trust me. When the grenades went off, a fresh curtain of smoke surged leftward. Men began to move in that direction, exaggeratedly, just enough to be noticed. Enemy guns swung. Riflemen shifted. Mara used that moment. While the enemy's attention bent toward the false push, she adjusted her aim and put 2 rounds into the jammer's remaining antenna array, shredding it. Sparks jerked. Panels warped. The hum in the ice dropped again, this time to a broken, stuttering whisper. Now their comms were not just degraded, but patchy, erratic. Enough for short bursts, enough for key phrases, enough to coordinate something bigger. With the jammer wounded and the sniper and primary drone gone, the kill box's edges began to fray. The mortars still fell, but their pattern was sloppy now, no longer hugging the platoon's movements with lethal intimacy. The heavy guns roared, but their arcs overlapped poorly. Cole sees a shift. Hammer elements, he called out. We're moving toward the small, rise 300 meters left of the crash site. Use the slack in the mortars and push in bounds. Talon, that ridge is your perspective LZ. You see us start a cluster there, you prepare to punch in. A ragged chorus of copy answered him. The platoon moved, not with the clean precision of a training exercise, but with the desperate ugliness of men too tired and too scared to do anything but try. They climbed, dragged, stumbled, their boots breaking through crusted snow into hidden holes. Wounded men gritted their teeth and let themselves be hauled, jostling broken limbs. Mara heard the climbers drawing closer. Ice tools bit in a rock somewhere above and below her ledge, sending small chips skittering past. She could almost feel their presence, like heat through the stone. She laid her rifle down for a moment and took out a small block of explosive from her demo kit. It wasn't much, meant for breaching doors, not remaking landscapes. But explosives didn't have to be huge to matter. They just had to be placed right. She wedged the charge into a fracture in the ice along the route the climbers were taking, tamped snow around it to shape the blast, then ran the firing line back to the cornice where she lay. The angle was tight, the margin of error thin. If she misjudged, she might bring the whole face down, burying herself and her people along with the enemy. If she got it right, she could trigger a controlled slide that would disrupt the climber's assault, buying time. She keyed her transmitter once to Cole, and, when he responded, sent 2 short clicks, followed by a longer one. Their shorthand: stand by for local avalanche. Keep your men out of the fall line. He didn't know exactly what she had in mind, but he trusted her enough not to ask for details. He shouted to the nearest squads, stay clear of the right side wall. You see snow start to move, you move the other way. She waited until she could hear the climbers almost overhead, their voices low, their breaths a harsh rasp. One slipped, cursed. Another responded with a quiet laugh. They were close, confident, nearly in position to look down and see her. She thumbed the detonator. The charge went off with a flat, muffled thump. For a split second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the ice where she'd placed it cracked in a spreading spiderweb, and the snowpack above it shuddered. A layer detached, turning from solid to fluid before her eyes. The slide wasn't huge, not like the roiling wall that had swallowed her earlier, but it was enough. Snow and ice poured down the climber's route in a narrow, focused stream, hitting them like a frozen river. She heard someone shout in surprise, then another scream as a man was swept off his tenuous perch. Tools scraped, ropes snapped taut. The assault teams scattered, some clinging desperately to holds, others disappearing into the white torrent. Mara ducked as powdered snow washed over the cornice, stinging her skin, stealing her breath for a heartbeat. When it passed, she was still there, pressed flat, heart hammering. She didn't have long. The enemy commander on the far ridge saw the slide and the disruption it caused to his hunting party. From her vantage, Mara saw him too, a stocky man in layered cold-weather gear, moving between positions, gesturing sharply. He shouted orders to the surviving climbers, pointed toward the valley, then toward the ridge where the jammer lay wounded. He was trying to reassert control, to pull scattered pieces back into a coherent whole. He was the fulcrum now. Kill him, and the attack, already fraying, would come apart entirely. He stood near the jammer, one hand on a radio handset, the other stabbing the air as he berated someone unseen. For the first time since she'd started shooting, he stepped fully into the open, away from cover. She settled the distorted center of her cracked optic on his chest. Distance, wind, angle. She ran the math automatically, factoring in the slight warping she'd already learned to compensate for with earlier shots. Her breath curled in the air. Below, her men were reaching the small rise, men collapsing behind rocks, panting, checking magazines that were mostly empty. Talon circled somewhere beyond the visible horizon, engines held at ready, waiting for the call to sprint into the hostile air. Fear tried one last time to get her to hurry, to yank the trigger and trust luck. Function told her to wait half a second longer, until he turned just enough that the armor gap under his arm exposed soft tissue. He turned, yelling something at a subordinate. His mouth was open. She squeezed. The crack of her rifle seemed to cut the entire battle in half. Through the optic, she saw him jerk, his body bowing, radio flying from his grip. He fell backward, arms flailing briefly before disappearing behind the jammer unit. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the tremor ran through the enemy line. Without their commander, without their primary sniper, without their drone eyes or intact jammer, their fire lost coherence. Some guns kept spraying in the directions they'd been pointed, too busy to notice. Others fell silent as crews froze, processing what they'd just seen. A few fighters, those with more sense than loyalty, began to pull back, dragging their own wounded, glancing nervously at the upper ridges where death had started falling from an unexpected angle. On the small rise, Cole heard the change. The patterns of impact shifted. The howl of rounds over their heads thinned. "Now," he shouted into the radio, "all hammer elements, consolidate on this ridge. Talon, this is Hammer 1. Marking LZ with green smoke." A hiss sounded as he popped the cylinder, thick green plumes curling into the air. It was a beacon and a target both, but he was out of options. They needed that bird. "As soon as you see that green, you drop in and hold your nose in the snow if you have to," he added. "We'll load fast." "Talon copies," the pilot replied, strained clear even through the fractured transmission. Inbound hot. Mara watched the platoon cluster on the rise, their movements less frantic now, but no less urgent. Her magazine was nearly empty. She could feel the weight difference. Each remaining round was a choice. She spent them well. A machine gun crew on the right tried to swing their weapon toward the green smoke, assuming it marked a renewed assault. She put a round through the gunner's shoulder, another through the assistant as he moved to take over. A squad leader started to rally a group of fighters who had begun to retreat, gesturing wildly, trying to reverse the tide. She dropped in mid-motion, his arms still raised. One of the surviving climbers recovered faster than the others, pulling himself up onto a ledge with grim determination. He was angling toward her, eyes searching. Her last shot punched into his chest, pinning him to the rock. Then her rifle clicked empty. She lay there for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the cold seep deeper into her bones. Her fingers ached as she ejected the magazine, confirming what she already knew. Nothing left. The sidearm at her hip felt laughably inadequate at this distance. Below, the thump of rotor blades rolled into the valley, growing louder. Talon's shape broke through the low cloud, angling in low, green smoke curling around its nose. Machine guns that still had ammunition tried to track it, but their fire was scattered, ineffective. The helicopter flared, kissed the snow with its skids, and the ramp dropped. The platoon moved in a blur, hands dragging, lifting, hauling wounded aboard. Hunt stayed off until the last possible second, hands covered in blood, barking at anyone who tried to help him instead of carrying bodies. Cole stood at the ramp, counting heads, eyes flicking to the ridges. He could see muzzle flashes still, see figures scrambling, but no organized push. The kill box had become a confused scratch of small fights and retreating silhouettes. He scanned the upper ridge where the ice cave's dark mouth yawned. For a second, he couldn't see her. Panic flared. Then a small, solitary shape appeared near the cornice, silhouetted against the glacier above. Even from this distance, he recognized the way she moved, deliberate, careful, every step a calculated risk. She wasn't heading toward them. She was moving along the ridge, away, toward a part of the mountain that dropped off too sharply for any bird to follow. He grabbed his radio. "Valkyrie," he yelled. "We can hold 30 seconds tops. Get your ass down here." Static hissed, then a faint click once. No, she could make it down the fissure again, maybe, but not in time. Not with her injuries, not with the terrain. She had to know that. She had to know that if she tried, she'd draw enemy fire toward the bird during the most vulnerable part of its flight. She wasn't going to do that. She wasn't built that way. He swore, fear and anger and respect all tangled up. "Mara, don't you?" 2 clicks. Later, he clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. There was no time. The engines were straining, whiteout beginning to curl around the helicopter as the rotors chopped the snow. The pilot shouted over the net, "Hammer 1, we are at max hover time. We lose it here, you're staying." Cole looked at his men, at the wounded, at the way some of them swayed where they stood, at the blood soaking into the ramp. He made the call he'd hate himself for if she didn't walk out again. "Go," he shouted. "We're loaded. Go." The ramp slammed shut. The helicopter lifted, nose dipping as the pilot fought for forward speed. Rounds chased them, futile streaks of light in the snowstorm they kicked up. The valley dropped away under them, becoming a white bowl again, then a blur, then nothing but cloud. On the mountain, Mara watched the aircraft punch out of the trap she'd just helped unmake. Relief loosened something in her chest she'd kept locked tight. She let herself feel it for a heartbeat, then rolled back toward the ice cave's mouth. The ridges were still dangerous. The enemy was still up here in pockets, some shaken, some furious. The fight wasn't fully over for her, but the platoon was out. The kill box had failed to close. Hours later, the mountain was a memory, and the war was reduced to the hum of generators and the crackle of radios inside canvas walls. Night had fallen over the forward operating base, turning the snow outside into a cold, reflective sheet. Inside the small field hospital tent, cots filled the space, each occupied by a bundle of blankets and bandages. The air smelled of antiseptic, blood, and instant coffee. Cole sat on an overturned crate, jacket open, a line of stitches running along his left cheek. Around him, his men dozed in fits, some with 4 lines taped to their arms, some with splints, some with only the 1,000-yard stare of those who'd had close brushes with oblivion. The faint rumble of outbound aircraft drifted through the canvas, a reminder that someone else, somewhere else, was taking a shift in this unending relay. The tent's flap moved, letting in a blade of cold air. Mara stepped in quietly, ducking under the low frame. Bandages wrapped her ribs and forehead. Her gear was gone, replaced by a simple fleece and pants that had seen better days. She looked exhausted, her skin pale against the bruises, but her eyes were clear. Conversation stuttered, then went silent. Men looked up, blinked, and straightened without thinking. She didn't make a speech. She moved from cot to cot, checking on each wounded operator, listening to their cracked jokes and muttered complaints. She touched shoulders, squeezed hands, said little. Somehow, her presence did more to settle them than any number of words could have. When she reached Reyes, his leg now wrapped in layers of gauze and immobilized in a rigid brace, he tried to sit up straighter. "Captain," he said, voice hoarse. "Guess I missed the scenic part of the trip." "You saw plenty of snow," she said, allowing a small smile. "You didn't miss much." He glanced at her bandages. "Thought you were gone," he confessed. "After that slide, I mean." "Not today," she said. "Mountain tried." I said no. He laughed, then winced, hand flying to his side. She waited until the spasm passed, then moved on. Later, in a smaller briefing tent, she sat at another folding table with Cole and the same intel officer who'd drawn the route line that morning. A laptop glowed in front of them, displaying intercepted enemy chatter, translated transcripts scrolling slowly. They knew your name, the intel man said quietly, tapping one line. Not just your call sign. They called this Operation Second Fall. Mara read the line. A commander's order to subordinate units, referencing a plan to lure the mountain sniper who lived through the first avalanche into a similar trap. A psychological victory. Capture her alive, parade her on camera as the one who'd cheated the mountain once, but not twice. The crash site had been bait, yes. The sensor pod and its data were valuable, but they weren't the only prize. The real trophy had been her. They knew too much, Cole said, anger simmering under his calm. About our patrol patterns. About the drone. About you. We've got a leak somewhere, or they're better at watching us than we thought. We'll find out which, the intel officer said. For now, what matters is that their narrative got broken. They spent manpower and ordnance and planning on this trap. They lost a commander, a jammer, at least 2 drone systems, and a lot of train fighters. And they didn't get you. Or the data. He looked up at Mara. You turned their story inside out. She shrugged, one shoulder lifting stiffly. We all did, she said. Mountains don't care which flag we wear. They just wait. They'd have taken us all if we'd let them. Cole leaned back in his chair, studying her. You saw it, he said. Back in the tent. The choke. The snow. You tried to warn us. I didn't see everything, she said. I just saw enough to know I didn't like it. I should have pushed harder. Don't start with that, he said sharply. We made the call together. And when it went sideways, you climbed into the mountain's throat and made it spit us out. Only reason I'm here to argue with you is because you decided to be stubborn in the right place. She looked away, jaw tight. The ghost of the previous disaster still hung around her, less a specter now than a shadow. Her fear hadn't vanished. It had simply been given different work to do. You think he'll try something like this again? He asked. Of course, she said. Different valley, different terrain, same idea. They're not stupid. They're patient. We've shown that we can bleed. They'll want to remind us. Then we watch the snow, Cole said. We listen when it bothers you. A corner of her mouth twitched. I'll put that in the SOP, she said dryly. Listen to the paranoid captain. Listen to the one who walked out of a crevasse and rewrote a death sentence, he countered. We'll workshop the phrasing. The debrief continued, filling in details, reconstructing timelines, mapping who had been where when. The more they spoke, the clearer it became how close they'd come to being erased, how narrow the margin had been, how many things had to go just wrong enough for their enemy, just right for them, for the valley to become a story instead of a memorial. Later still, when the base quieted into the odd-non silence of a war zone between emergencies, Mara found herself alone in a storage tent. Racks of gear loomed in the dim light, packs, helmets, spare rifles. She sat on a crate, her damaged rifle across her knees. The optic was cracked, the barrel scoured in a few places by ice and rock. It had technically done its job. She could justify turning it in and drawing a fresh one. Instead, she field-stripped it with the same care she'd give a brand-new weapon. Cloth and solvent, practice motions. Her hands shook once or twice, not from cold anymore, but from the lingering adrenaline that took its time leaving the body. Each tremor she rode out, pressing palms against metal until they steadied. She thought of the men's faces in the hospital tent, of Reyes's forced grin, of the way Cole had looked when he'd realized she was alive, of the enemy commander tipping backward under a shot, his carefully plotted diagram of domination falling apart around him. She thought of the mountain itself, indifferent, unmoved, waiting. It would take whoever walked its flanks without respect. It didn't care about flags or motives. It cared about balance and about gravity and about tiny triggers and snowpacks. She ran a patch through the barrel, watched it come out dirty, then cleaner, then finally white. When she finished, she reassembled the rifle and slid it into a cold weather bag, zipping it closed with a soft rasp. She set the bag aside and sat for a moment, hands resting on her knees, listening to the faint sounds outside. The murmur of distant voices, the creak of stressed wood, the low rumble of an engine on standby. She stood, flicked off the light, and stepped out into the night. The base was a cluster of shadows and glows, generator noises and antenna silhouettes. Beyond the wire, the mountains loomed, black shapes against the sky powdered with faint stars. She walked a few yards from the tent, stopping where the packed snow met the untouched drift beyond. The air was brittle, every breath cutting and clean. She could almost feel the valley on the back of her neck, even now, like a hand that had reached for her and missed. Somewhere behind her, Cole's voice carried faintly as he joked with a sentry, making light of the day's brush with annihilation. Overhead, a lone aircraft droned, a distant guardian. She slid her hands into her pockets and tilted her face up to the dark slopes. Somewhere in those heights, on some future day, someone else would step into a kill box without knowing it. Maybe it would be her team. Maybe someone else's. The mountain would wait the same way. What had changed, what would always be different now, was that there were men standing on ridges or sitting at map tables who had watched a commander everyone had written off as gone walk back out of that darkness, still covering them. Sometimes she thought that was enough. The narrator's voice, you could almost hear at the edge of the wind, would have put it differently, folding the whole day into a single line. Sometimes the most dangerous person on the mountain is the one you already decided was lost, because while you were writing their ending, they were still up there in the dark, drawing you a way out.